Welcome to CSS Breakdown, book by book, where today, in Season 06, Episode 19, we open Norman Lowe's Mastering Modern British History to uncover the complex and often contentious journey of trade unions and the nascent Labour Party in shaping modern Britain. You know, when we talk about history, sometimes the biggest shifts aren't these loud bangs, but more like a slow, steady grinding of gears happening, well, almost behind the scenes.
That's right, before they suddenly explode into public view.
Exactly. And that's the kind of deep dive we're doing today. We're looking at this really pivotal period leading right up to the First World War that, laid the groundwork for modern labor relations and the whole political landscape in Britain. Our mission really is to trace how these scattered, often illegal worker groups transformed into organized movements and eventually birthed a major political party.
And what's really fascinating looking at the source material is how it lays out this evolution. I mean, starting from a point where just forming a workers' group was flat out illegal, to seeing these groups become genuinely powerful political forces. It's quite a story of struggle and adaptation.
Absolutely. So picture this. You're in early 19th century Britain. The Industrial Revolution is just roaring ahead, changing everything, but for the average worker, almost no rights at all. So yeah, this is a story of legal battles, big industrial actions, and some truly remarkable people challenging the status quo.
Which brings us to a really important question, doesn't it? How do these separate attempts at organizing, often met with just fierce opposition, eventually come together into something cohesive, something influential?
Right.
We'll be looking at those critical moments, the big strikes, the landmark court cases that really spurred change.
The early seeds of unionism, from illegality to grand failures. Late 18th century, 1834.
Okay, let's dig into this right from the start. Our sources tell us that before the 19th century, you had these local trade associations, sure, but then the Industrial Revolution hits, and suddenly there's this real fear among the ruling classes.
Precisely. And the Combination Acts of 1799 and 1800 were a direct result. Almost a panicked response, really.
Making it illegal to combine for wages or hours.
Exactly. Illegal. And you have to remember the context that the French Revolution wasn't that long ago, so in the eyes of the elite, unions looked dangerous, revolutionary even.
And these laws, they stayed put through the whole Napoleonic Wars period and the unrest that followed. But there was a pushback, wasn't there? People like Francis Place, Joseph Hume.
There was a campaign. And they finally succeeded in getting the Combination Acts repealed in 1824, which sounds like a huge victory.
Yeah, you'd think so.
But the pendulum swung back incredibly fast. You saw this immediate surge in new unions and strikes, which led directly to the Amending Act of 1825.
Okay, so what did that do?
Well, it said unions could exist, technically, to negotiate wages and hours, but things like peaceful picketing or any kind of obstruction, forbidden. So holding a strike without breaking the law was still, almost impossible.
Right, so it's like you can exist, but you can't actually do much effectively, a real catch-22.
Exactly, and local strikes were easily broken. Employers just brought in blackleg strikebreakers from other towns.
So that obviously wasn't working long-term. What was the next thought?
The idea started to grow that, you needed nationwide unions, something bigger. John Doherty founded the National Union of Cotton Spinners in 1829. That was really the first effective national union for a single trade.
And he tried to go even bigger.
He did. He set up the National Association for the Protection of Labor in 1830, tried to bring lots of unions together. Got about 150 involved.
But our sources show these early national attempts, like the Operative Builders Union too, they just didn't last very long. Why not?
A few reasons. Constant money problems, poor coordination between branches communication was a nightmare back then, and sometimes, ironically, when trade improved, the urgency faded a bit.
Okay, this brings us to a really key figure, Robert Owen. And his Grand National Consolidated Trades Union, the GNCTU, in 1834. Who exactly was Robert Owen? His vision seems different.
Oh, Owen was remarkable. An industrialist, a reformer. Started with very little, ended up managing a huge spinning mill, then owning his own factories. His ideas were incredibly radical for the time, especially coming from, a factory owner.
Right. Tell us about New Lanark, his big experiment.
Yeah, New Lanark was his showpiece. He believed people's character was formed by their environment, so he reshaped it. Bigger, lighter factories, shorter hours, new houses, a school with outdoor activities, parks.
Yeah.
He even had a scheme for workers to buy goods at cost price. And famously, he paid wages even when trade was slow, like during the cotton shortages in the War of 1812. He basically proved you could be profitable and treat your workers well.
A massive contrast to the norm. So how did his cooperative ideas develop from there?
Well, he was kind of disappointed that the government and other factory owners didn't really pick up on his model, and he was influenced by David Ricardo's ideas that an item's value comes purely from the labor involved. So Owen started thinking maybe capitalists weren't even necessary. He envisioned these cooperative communities jointly owning production, setting prices based on labor time. He even tried a labor exchange in London with hours work certificates.
How did that go?
It didn't really work. Too many crafts, not enough food being exchanged. His London Cooperative Society had limited success too. Though the idea of co-op shops was picked up later, very successfully. He even tried a village in the U.S., New Harmony. That also failed.
So these big ideas but the practical experiments often struggled. How did he end up connecting with the trade unions then?
When he came back to Britain, he found his cooperative ideas really appealed to workers. Then, in late 1833, there was this lockout of union silk throwers in Derby. That was the trigger. Owen formed the GNCTU, invited everyone to join.
And the response was?
Astonishing. Within weeks, apparently over 500,000 members. It had this impressive structure, national and local.
500,000. What was the ultimate goal? It sounds huge.
It was. Owen aimed for nothing less than a total reorganization of society. Workers' control replacing private ownership. Eventually, the GNCTU controlling the government.
Seriously.
Yeah. He hoped it would be voluntary, peaceful. But if not, he talked about a general strike, a sacred month, to force the change.
But as our source points out, it collapsed incredibly quickly. By August 1834, it was gone. What happened?
Several things went wrong fast. 4 of the biggest skilled unions, builders, potters, spinners, clothiers, they wouldn't join. Feared losing their identity, maybe.
Okay, that's a blow.
Communication was just impossible across such a huge organization, and internally, they couldn't agree. Some wanted strikes now, some wanted revolution, some just wanted better conditions. It was all over the place.
And the employers pushed back hard.
Oh, yeah. They fought back fiercely, made workers sign the documents swearing they weren't members. Sackings were common, and the Whig government backed the employers.
This is where the Tolpuddle Martyrs story comes in, isn't it?
Yeah.
A really stark example of that government response.
Exactly. The most famous case, Tolpuddle, Dorset. 6 agricultural workers, members of a friendly union. Their leader was George Lovelace, a Methodist preacher. They were arrested in 1834.
What was the charge? Violence?
No, nothing like that. No strike, no violence. The charge was administering illegal oaths, just for forming the union, basically. They got 7 years transportation to Tasmania, a brutal sentence upheld by Lord Melbourne, the Home Secretary.
7 years?
Yeah.
Just for organizing?
Yeah. It sent a real chill through the union movement. It was a huge factor in the GNCTU's collapse. Made people terrified.
So the GNCTU failed, but was Owen's impact completely lost?
Not at all. While his big experiments didn't always work out, except New Lanark, Owen was crucial as the first person to really popularize socialism in Britain. In the short term, workers turned to things like Chartism, the Anti-Corn Law League. But his idea of cooperative shops, that stuck.
And that leads to the Rochdale Pioneer.
Precisely. In 1844, a few weavers in Rochdale, G.J. Holyoake, Charles Howarth, and others set up a co-op store, pooled savings, bought goods, sold at normal prices.
But the key difference was?
They shared most of the profits among the purchasers, the members. This self-help model was a spectacular success. By 1850, over 100 co-op societies. Then the Cooperative Wholesale Society, the CWS, in 1863. By 1900, 2 million members, even its own tea plantation. A real practical legacy from Owen's ideas.
The ascent of new model unions and legal protection, 1850s, 1870s.
Okay, so after Owen's grand, maybe overly ambitious vision and a tough decade for unions in the 1840s, how did they regroup? How did they find a firmer footing?
Well, the 1850s brought a period of prosperity, and that created space for new attempts. This time, it was mainly skilled workers leading the way, forming large national unions. This is what we call the era of the new model unions.
Right, and the Amalgamated Society of Engineers, the ASE, from 1851, seems like the classic example. What made them different? What was the new model?
Founded by William Allen and William Newton. Their whole approach was different. Their aim wasn't revolution, not changing society fundamentally, but improving their members' position within capitalism.
Okay, so more pragmatic.
Very pragmatic. Better wages, better conditions. They were prepared to negotiate, saw strikes as a last resort. And crucially, They charged high membership fees, a shilling a week, which was a lot then.
And then it allowed them to.
Provide benefits, unemployment pay, sickness pay. This made them financially stable, strong, and, importantly, respectable in the eyes of society.
That respectability does seem key here. And other unions followed this model, like the Amalgamated Society of Carpenters.
Yes, exactly. Built up by Robert Applegarth in 1860. That's why we call it the New Model. Others copy the ASC's structure and approach.
And the leaders of these unions, Alan, Applegarth, they became quite powerful figures, didn't they? The junta.
That's what their critics called them, the junta. They saw their members, these skilled workers, as a kind of labor aristocracy. And they worked hard to convince everyone, politicians, the public, that their unions were moderate, responsible, not dangerous radicals.
And this group, the junta, they were also behind the first Trades Union Congress, the TUC, in 1868, which became permanent.
Yes, a permanent body, guiding member unions, even talking directly to government ministers, a huge step towards legitimacy and coordinated action.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still major legal hurdles, right? Picketing, striking, protecting their funds.
Absolutely. Those issues weren't settled, and employers were always looking for ways to undermine them.
Which brings us to the Sheffield outrages in 1866. What happened there? It sounds pretty bad.
It was. These were incidents mainly in the cutlery trade, where some union extremists used violence and intimidation, smashing tools, blowing up a workshop, even a gunpowder explosion at a worker's house.
And employers seized on this.
Completely. It gave them the perfect excuse to demand a royal commission to investigate unions, hoping to paint them all as violent and curb their power.
And then another blow, the Hornby v. Close case in 1867, that hit their finances.
It did, badly. The Boilermakers Society tried to sue a treasurer who'd stolen funds. They thought they were covered by the Friendly Societies Act, like a mutual aid club. But the Court of Queen's Bench, ruled no. A trade union wasn't a friendly society. It was an organization in restraint of trade. Meaning, its funds were not legally protected, a huge vulnerability.
Okay, so you have the Sheffield outrages painting unions as violent, Hornby v. Close saying their money isn't safe. What did the Royal Commission actually conclude after all that?
Well, much to the employers' annoyance, the commission actually came down grudgingly in favor of the unions between 1868-69.
Really? How?
Applegarth from the junta gave very skillful evidence. He stressed their disapproval of strikes, highlighted all the benefits members got: the sick pay, unemployment support. The commission found the outrages were declining and, crucially, recommended that union funds should be protected by law.
Wow, a major turnaround.
A massive win for the unions. It paved the way for full legalization.
So what drove that final push for legal recognition in the 1870s?
Two main things. One, the Royal Commission basically saying unions were respectable. And two, the 1867 Reform Act had given the vote to many skilled working men, the very members of these new model unions.
Ah, so now they were voters the parties had to listen to.
Exactly. Both the liberals under Gladstone and the conservatives under Disraeli were suddenly very interested in winning the new working class vote.
And the key laws came under both parties, is that right?
Yes, it was a bit back and forth. Gladstone's Trade Union Act in 1871 was huge. It finally recognized unions as legal bodies, protected their funds, confirmed their right to strike.
Okay, seems settled.
But Gladstone also passed the Criminal Law Amendment Act the same year, which made picketing illegal. So you could strike, but you couldn't effectively persuade anyone not to cross the picket line.
Making strikes pretty difficult to win.
Right. It really took Disraeli's conservative government to tidy it up. His Conspiracy and Protection of Property Act in 1875 made peaceful picketing legal. And the Employers and Workmen Act in 1876 put employers and workers on an equal footing in breach of contract cases. That package really solidified their legal standing.
The spark of new unionism and the Dockers' triumph, late 1870s, 1900.
Okay, so by the late 1870s, skilled workers' unions have achieved legal recognition. But, as our source highlights, there's this whole other group, the unskilled workers, and a new wave starts, new unionism. Why did this emerge then?
Well, despite the legal wins for the skilled guys, the vast majority of unskilled workers were still completely unorganized, unprotected, and the economic depression of the late 19th century hit them hardest.
First to be laid off, I imagine.
Exactly. During slumps in 79 and 86, they were the most exploited. Plus, education was spreading. More laborers could read. They were aware of the advantages the model unions had won. It was logical they'd want something similar.
And the factories themselves played a role.
Yeah, the factory system concentrated large numbers of unskilled workers together. That naturally fostered a sense of solidarity, a shared experience.
There was an early attempt with agricultural laborers, Joseph Arch's union in 1872, but that struggled after a lockout. Where did new unionism really start to see success?
A key moment was the Bryant and May Match Girls strike in London, 1888. 700 girls, encouraged by Annie Besant, a Fabian socialist.
Protesting terrible conditions, right? Phossy jaw.
Horrific conditions. The poisonous phosphorus fumes caused phossy jaw, a dreadful bone disease. There was huge public sympathy, and they won. That victory inspired others. Then in 1889, Will Thorne formed the Gas Workers Union and successfully demanded an 8-hour day.
And this leads to the London Dockers strike in 1889, described as the most spectacular success. What was that all about?
Yeah, building on that momentum, Ben Tillett, Tom Mann, John Burns, key figures, formed a general laborers union. Their big demand was a minimum wage of 6 pence an hour, the Dockers tanner.
So 6 pence.
But it wasn't just the money. They wanted more regular work, hated the system where they had to wait around, sometimes bribe foremen just to get picked for a few hours labor. It was about dignity, too.
And the dock owners refused to budge.
Refused to even negotiate. So the entire dock labor force walked out on August 14th, 1889.
How did they possibly win a 5-week strike? They must have had no funds, and employers would use blacklegs.
Several crucial factors. They had vital support from skilled workers like the stevedores and watermen, which basically shut down the whole port of London.
Paralyzed it.
Completely. And the strike itself was conducted very peacefully. Huge processions, mass meetings that really won over public opinion. Donations started pouring in. And then the clincher. An unexpected gift of £30,000 from Australian trade unions.
£30,000 from Australia.
Yeah. It was massive. It allowed them to hold out when they desperately needed funds.
And wasn't Cardinal Manning involved, too, the head of the Catholic Church?
He was. Cardinal Manning, along with the Lord Mayor of London, publicly backed the Dockers. They helped persuade the employers that the demands were actually quite reasonable. That external pressure was key.
So what was the real significance of the Dockers winning? What did it change?
It was a massive turning point. It proved decisively that even the lowest paid, most exploited workers could organize, take on powerful employers, and win, provided, their demands were seen as fair and the strike was orderly.
Gave a huge boost to new unionism.
Enormous boost. New unions for unskilled workers sprang up everywhere, and even the older model unions saw their membership increase. It was a watershed moment.
But that high point of 1889, it didn't just continue upwards, did it? The source says new unionism hit problems in the 1890s. What went wrong?
Another economic depression hit. Unemployment soared, and it's almost impossible to win strikes when bosses can just sack strikers and hire desperate unemployed men queuing up for any work.
Right.
Employers also organized and fought back much harder. They used non-union labor, often protected by police. The failed strike in Hull in 1893 was a really decisive defeat for new unionism.
And there were tensions within the movement, too, between the older model unions and the new ones. The source mentions a historical debate here.
Yeah, there were apparent differences. On the surface, the new unions were much poorer, lower fees, maybe a penny a week. They didn't offer friendly society benefits like sick pay, arguing the state should provide that.
And more militant.
Generally, yes. Many leaders were socialists like Mann, Tillett, Burns. They wanted political action alongside industrial action. They felt the state had a duty to ensure a decent living standard. They often criticized the old model leaders for perhaps being too cautious, not tackling unemployment head-on.
But historians now question how deep this divide really was.
Many do, yeah. They argue it was maybe too simplistic an interpretation. Paul Edelman points out that even TUC speeches in the late 1880s supported things like the 8-hour day, land nationalization, quite radical ideas. Henry Pelling argued militancy wasn't just confined to the poor. Better-off workers could be militant, too. The lines were probably blurrier than portrayed.
So despite the Depression, the employer fight back, these internal tensions, how did new unionism survive the 1890s at all?
Well, unions in industries that were expanding, like gas, water, electricity, they fared better. Often these were owned by local councils.
Ah, accountable to voters.
Exactly. So employers there had more incentive to keep good relations. These unions became better led, maybe a bit more like the old craft unions in Outlook. They focused on building strength in specific workplaces, emphasizing their members as specialized, indispensable. This led towards industry-wide collective bargaining.
So the lines blurred even more.
Yeah, as Paul Edelman notes, the frontiers blurred. Even old unions like the ASE started relaxing rules to admit less skilled workers.
So looking back at new unionism by 1900, what was its true significance?
Industrially, if you asked in 1889, you'd say it was huge, but its industrial development actually stalled a bit before 1914. Its political significance, however, was immense. Ben Tillett himself said it marked the start of the close alliance between the trade union movement and the socialist movement, which produced the Labor Party. They agreed on working-class solidarity, on needing state action against poverty, and that alliance was really cemented by the legal challenges that came next.
Legal obstacles and the emergence of the Labor Party, early 20th century.
Okay, so the scene is set for this political alliance. But before the Labor Party really takes off, unions face yet another round of legal battles. The source mentions this general feel of union power among employers, landowners.
Yes, and that fear translated into direct legal attacks aimed at crippling the movement. There was the big engineering lockout in 1897-98, where employers successfully used blackleg labor to defeat an 8-hour-day demand. That caused a lot of bitterness.
And then the Lyons v. Wilkins case in 1899, what was the impact of that one?
That involved the fancy leather workers. The appeal court basically issued an injunction stopping the union from picketing. This was really serious because it seemed to undermine or even reverse the 1876 Act that allowed peaceful picketing.
Another direct threat.
A huge threat. And it directly prompted the TUC to vote only just by a small majority to actually hold a meeting with socialist societies to figure out a political response.
And that meeting, February 1900, creates the Labor Representation Committee, the LRC. That's seen as the start of the Labor Party, right? So legal threats directly led to political organization.
Absolutely. A direct catalyst. Many union leaders just concluded, look, strikes are failing, the law's against us, Parliament is the only way left. But initial support was, well, pretty cool. Only about 10 unions affiliated at first.
But then came the Taff Vale case, 1901. This sounds like the real game changer, the event that really propelled labor forward.
It was seismic. It started with a strike on the Taff Vale Railway in Wales. Workers wanted better conditions, recognition for the Amalgamated Society of Railway Servants, ASRS. The company broke the strike.
Okay, standard practice maybe.
But then they did something unprecedented. They sued the union itself for damages for the profits they lost during the strike.
Sued the union? Could they do that?
That was the question. After months of legal argument, it went all the way to the House of Lords, the highest court, and they ruled for the company. The ASRS was ordered to pay £23,000 in damages, plus costs. Total bill, £42,000.
£42,000, that's an astronomical sum for a union back then. What did that ruling mean?
It was potentially fatal. It meant any union calling any strike could be sued into bankruptcy. Strike action became virtually impossible overnight. The only way out was to get Parliament to change the law.
So politics became the only option.
The absolute focus. When the Conservative government refused to act, union leaders basically told their members, support the Labor Party. That's our only hope.
And that led to a flood of affiliations.
A huge surge.
Yeah.
By 1903, 168 more unions joined the LRC. Suddenly, it had members, it had money from the political levy, and this set the stage for the 1906 general election.
Where labor made its breakthrough, was there a deal involved?
Yes, a crucial secret pact agreed in 1903 between Ramsay MacDonald for the LRC and Herbert Gladstone, the Liberal chief whip. The Liberals agreed not to run candidates against Labor in certain constituencies.
Giving Labor a clear run against the Conservatives.
Exactly. Avoiding splitting the anti-conservative vote. It worked. Labor won 29 seats in 1906. And when those 29 MPs arrived at Westminster, they officially called themselves the Labor Party.
And one of the first things the new Liberal government did was pass the Trade Disputes Act of 1906, undoing Taff Vale.
Precisely. It was based on Labor's own bill.
Yep.
It fundamentally reversed. Taff Vale unions could not be sued for damages caused by strikes, and it confirmed peaceful picketing was legal. Our source calls this possibly the most important act in trade union history. It directly enabled that big wave of strikes from 1910 onwards.
Okay, so Taff Vale overturned, picketing legal, smooth sailing now. Nope. Another legal challenge. The Osborne Judgment, 1909. This hit the Labor Party itself.
Right at the wallet. Unions paid for their MPs. Remember, MPs weren't paid by the state. Then using a political levy added to subscriptions. W.V. Osborne, a union member but also a liberal, challenged this levy in court.
On what grounds?
He argued unions shouldn't be forcing members to fund a political party they might not support. The House of Lords agreed with him. They ruled it illegal for unions to collect money for political party support.
How damaging was that for labor?
Extremely serious. The party was already short of cash. Suddenly, it couldn't afford to support about 16 of its MPs. It looked like it might cripple them. And it also pushed some angry unionists towards more radical stuff, like syndicalism, thinking Parliament was useless anyway.
But again, Parliament eventually provided a solution.
Yes, 2 steps. First, under pressure, the government introduced salaries for all MPs in 1911, £400 a year. That eased the immediate financial crisis for Labour MPs.
Okay, that helps.
Then, more pressure led to the Trade Union Act of 1913. This effectively reversed Osborne. The political levy became legal again, but members could choose to contract out if they objected.
Did many contract out?
Turns out, most didn't bother. So the party's finances got a life-saving boost.
So by 1914, on the eve of the Great War, unions had basically overcome all the major legal obstacles. Right to strike, right to picket, right to fund political action.
They had arrived as a major force, legally secure and politically active. A massive transformation from where they started.
Syndicalism, militancy, and the Labor Party's trajectory, 1910, 1914.
Right, so legal hurdles mostly cleared. But then the source talks about this period, 1910 to 1914, seeing a real surge in union militancy and the rise of something called syndicalism. What exactly were syndicalist ideas?
Syndicalism was quite a radical ideology, influenced by revolutionary union movements in France and America. The core belief was that the trade union movement itself, not Parliament or the state, was destined to be the main democratic force of the future.
Owning industries, controlling policy.
Yeah, exactly. Owning industries, land, controlling the economy, social policy. They saw party politics as basically pointless, a farce and a sham.
So their focus was entirely on direct action, outside Parliament.
Precisely. They championed the idea of the sympathetic strike, getting unions in different industries to strike together in solidarity to maximize pressure. The ultimate goal for many syndicalists was a general strike to completely overthrow capitalism, with the unions then taking charge.
Sounds a bit like Robert Owen's ultimate vision, in a way.
Yeah. There are echoes, definitely, though Owen generally disliked violence, whereas syndicalism could be more confrontational.
Why did this militant approach gain so much ground in Britain right then?
Several reasons converging. There was serious labor unrest anyway. Unemployment, yes, but also falling real wages. Prices were rising, but wages weren't keeping up, hitting unskilled workers particularly hard.
So frustration was building.
Huge frustration, and many felt the results achieved by the Labour Party in Parliament were, well, disappointing, limited. Then the Osborne Judgment came along, seemingly designed to cripple labor politically, which just fueled the fire. And another factor, perhaps surprisingly, was the House of Lords rejecting Lloyd George's People's Budget in 1909. Many workers thought, well, if the Lords can break the rules for their own ends, why can't we? It kind of legitimized direct action in some eyes.
And this led to that wave of major strikes between 1910 and 1914.
It did. Started with railway workers in 1910, then Lancashire cotton workers, boiler makers, Welsh miners. 1911 saw a big, successful dock strike across all ports, and a transport strike in Liverpool where troops were called in, and tragically 2 men were killed.
So, serious confrontations.
Very serious. There was a bit of a lull on the mainland in 1913, but then a huge syndicalist strike erupted in Dublin, lasting over 6 months. The unrest was widespread and intense.
Then unions were also getting bigger, more organized during this time.
Yes, consolidating their power. Several small railway unions merged to form the National Union of Railwaymen, the NUR, and then in 1914, the really powerful Triple Alliance was formed.
Who's in that?
The NUR, the Transport Workers Federation, and the Miners' Federation, 3 massive unions joining forces. The outbreak of World War I probably prevented a huge Triple Alliance strike right then, but the alliance itself survived and was a major factor in the 1926 general strike later on.
Okay, let's pivot slightly to the Labour Party itself during this pre-war period. The source stresses it wasn't one single thing, but an alliance, an amalgamation.
That's crucial to understand. It was formed from different socialist groups, the Social Democratic Federation, the Fabians, the Independent Labor Party, plus, of course, the affiliated trade unions. They all called themselves socialist, but their aims and methods could vary quite a bit.
But the shared goal was?
Representing working-class interests in Parliament, improving workers' lives.
What were the deeper roots? Why did it emerge when it did?
You have to look at late Victorian social conditions. That last quarter of the 19th century, maybe 30% of the working class lived incredibly close to starvation, made worse by economic depressions. And the contrast between that poverty and the wealth of the upper and middle classes was just stark. and increasingly visible.
And ideas were spreading. The source mentioned Henry George's book, Progress in Poverty.
Yes, that book had a huge impact in 1881. George blamed landowner greed, advocated a big land tax, and because of spreading Education Forsters Act of 1870, more working people could actually read this stuff, read socialist papers like Blatchford's Clarion.
And dissatisfaction with existing parties.
Definitely. Growing impatience among radicals with Gladstone's liberals, who seemed to ignore social reform despite more workers having the vote after the 1867 and 1884 acts.
The source mentions two key socialist groups formed back in 1884 with different approaches.
Right. You had the Social Democratic Federation, the SDF, led by H.M. Hyndman. They were quite Marxist, advocated revolution, organized marches like Bloody Sunday in 1887.
Yeah, and the other?
The Fabian Society. Very different. Middle-class intellectuals, Sidney and Beatrice Webb, George Bernard Shaw. They believed in community ownership, socialism, but not violence. Their tactic was Fabianism, gradual change, permeating existing parties and institutions with socialist ideas. Permeation, they called it.
But eventually, the idea of a completely separate Labor Party gained traction.
Yeah.
The Independent Labor Party, the ILP.
Yes, formed by James Keir Hardie in 1893. Hardie was a Scottish miner who became utterly disillusioned with the Liberals. He'd already formed a Scottish Labour Party. He became the first real Labour MP in 1892 and was convinced workers needed their own truly independent voice.
And a strike in Yorkshire helped create the opportunity.
The Manningham Mills strike in Bradford, 1890-91. Workers struck against wage cuts. The mill owners, local politicians who were mostly liberal, and the police all lined up against them. The strike failed, but it showed many workers in the North that the Liberals weren't on their side.
Pushing them towards Hardie's idea.
Exactly. Especially in places like Bradford with old radical traditions. Hardie seized the moment, organized the conference in 1893, and the ILP was born.
Its aim was collective ownership eventually, but focused on social conditions first. So how did this, plus the union's own experiences, lead to the Labor Party's actual formation in 1900?
It was those later events, the engineering lockout, the Lyons v. Wilkins case, that really pushed the unions over the edge. The TUC proposed that meeting with the socialist groups, the SDF, the Fabians, Hardie's ILP. They met in February 1900, agreed to form a distinct labor group in Parliament, the Labor Representation Committee, the LRC. Ramsay MacDonald became secretary. That's generally seen as the starting point of the Labour Party. Initially, its aims were quite modest, just get working-class voices into Parliament, vague on socialism.
What about Marx? How much direct influence did Marxist ideas have?
Well, Marx certainly appealed to the syndicalists, and figures like Tom Mann were Marxists. The SDF was the most explicitly Marxist group. But the source suggests we shouldn't exaggerate his direct impact on the Labour Party's formation. The ILP, arguably more important in getting labor started, grew more out of practical working-class issues in Scotland and the North than pure Marxist theory. It was more Methodism than Marx, some have said.
Okay, so let's track labor's progress or lack of it between 1900 and 1914.
Initially pretty slow. Only 2 LRC MPs elected in 1900, Keir Hardie and Richard Bell. Union support was minimal, only 10 affiliated initially.
But then Taff Vale changed everything.
Completely. MacDonald hammered home the need for political representation. Unions flooded in 168 more by 1903. The political levy provided funds. And that crucial 1903 Lib-Lab Pact gave them a fighting chance in certain seats.
Leading to the 29 seats in 1906.
Exactly. Their first real breakthrough. They became the Labour Party.
And they had some early wins, like the Trade Disputes Act.
Yes, and small improvements to workplace compensation, school meals, medical checks for kids. But after 1907, their influence in Parliament seemed to decline. They mostly just went along with liberal reforms.
But outside Parliament, support was still growing.
Definitely. Unions were grateful for the 1906 Act, more affiliated. Falling real wages, ongoing disputes with employers, often liberals, made socialist ideas more appealing. Getting the Miners' Federation to affiliate in 1909 was a huge boost, one of the biggest unions.
And even with the Osborne Judgment hitting their finances, they gained seats in the 2 1910 elections.
They did 40 seats in January, 42 in December. But here's the catch. Only 2 of those were won by actually beating a liberal. The rest were thanks to the ongoing pact. By 1914, Labor was making gains in local elections, but nationally it was still very dependent on the Liberals.
So committed socialists were getting frustrated.
Very, especially when MacDonald himself said in 1911 the party was not socialist, just a federation for immediate political work. It highlighted the internal tensions.
Which brings us to that final big historical debate. By 1914, was Labor's rise inevitable? Was the liberal decline sealed?
It's a classic debate. Historians like Henry Pelling and Ross McKibben argue, yes, labor's rise was pretty much inevitable by around 1906. Pelling points to long-term social changes, industrial cities, class consciousness, cost of living. McKibben stresses trade union growth inherently weakening the liberals, and adds that the liberals alienating potential women voters helped labor. McKibben also argues the main things holding labor back before 1914 were Osborne's financial hit and the fact that many working-class men still couldn't vote. He suggests if you had full male suffrage pre-war, labor's strength would have been obvious. So the 1918 act that tripled the electorate just revealed labor's underlying strength. It didn't create it.
But others disagree strongly with this inevitability idea. What's their case?
Historians like P.F. Clark and Trevor Wilson argue the opposite. They point to new liberalism, things like national insurance in 1911, other reforms showing the liberals were still dynamic, still fighting for the working class vote before 1914. Wilson famously argues the First World War was the key factor. It split the liberals irrevocably, allowing labor to step into the gap. Without the war, he thinks, labor might have remained a junior partner. And more recent historians like Duncan Tanner and Martin Pugh also reject inevitability. Pugh calls it hindsight. He argues labor struggled to seem radically different from the liberals pre-war unless they pushed socialism hard, which wasn't popular with most voters or even many labor MPs then.
Weak organization, too.
Yeah, Pugh highlights weak local party organization and points out that in the 1910 elections, where liberals lost seats, they mainly lost them to the conservatives, not labor. Liberals held on pretty well in industrial areas.
So labor was winning mainly where liberals stood aside. No by-election wins between 1910 and 1914, which raises that interesting final point. Could labor actually have been damaged by the intense strike wave of 1910-12, maybe putting off potential middle-class support? It's certainly not a simple picture of inevitable ascent.
Outro.
Wow.
What a journey we've covered today. I mean, from workers meeting secretly, illegally, to the rise of these huge national unions and the actual birth of a major political party. It's so clear the path was never smooth, was it? Full of legal fights, internal splits, moments of amazing success and crushing defeat.
And connecting it to the bigger picture really shows how fundamental change happens, doesn't it? It's rarely straightforward. It's this complex mix of economic forces, visionary individuals, people acting together collectively, and the whole political landscape shifting around them. The story up to 1914 is just one of relentless struggle for a voice, for basic recognition, for dignity. So what does this mean for you, listening? Well, maybe the next time you hear about a union negotiation, or think about the role of political parties focused on workers' rights, just pause and consider how much of that was fought for, inch by painful inch, over more than 100 years. It really puts today's debates into a much deeper historical perspective, I think. Reminds us that rights we might take for granted were won through immense effort and sacrifice.
And that brings up a really interesting question to ponder, doesn't it? Given this history, the ups and downs of union power, the Labor Party's early struggles for its own identity, its reliance on, then separation from, the liberals, how do you think those foundational challenges, that complex birth, continue to shape their roles, their strategies, their very identities in British society today?
That's a great thought to leave you with. Something to mull over as you continue your own deep dive into the fascinating world around us.